Welcome in, Hokies fans, to this edition of the Tech Sideline podcast. We record on Wednesday, November 2nd, as we get you ready for Saturday's matchup at home in a battle of the Techs between the 2-6 Hokies and the 3-5 Yellow Jackets. On today's episode, we'll talk key players, keys to the game, and what the Hokies need to do to get back in the win column. All of that and more coming up on episode 268 of the Tech Sideline podcast, which starts right now. Welcome you in, whether you are listening or watching on YouTube. If you are on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe while you're there, and also turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future podcasts. This edition of the Tech Sideline podcast is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference in your overall experience. First Bank and Trust Company is the bank that puts you first. Visit www.firstbank.com to learn more. Let's introduce the crew for today. On set, we have Will Stewart, founder and general manager of Tech Sideline. Across the way, to my right, lead analyst and columnist Chris Coleman. In the fourth chair today is Carter Hill. Behind the scenes producing is Nick Brown, and I'm your host for today, Katie Adams. So let's get into it. Georgia Tech has had some ups and downs this season, probably more downs than ups, and that goes back to the headline of their year being the firing of Jeff Collins. Back in early September, he went 10-28 while at Georgia Tech. It can be tough to establish buy-in from players, especially if you have a change that early in the season. But really, Georgia Tech has been an improved team for the most part.
He recruited well.
Jeff Collins?
Yeah, they just couldn't coach. And it's funny, like the first two games after he got fired, they won. And I don't think they had won two games in a row.
Duke, and Duke had been...
Duke was on a hot streak.
Yeah, they beat Duke and Pitt.
Wow.
Yeah, right.
I'd like to beat Duke and Pitt.
Yeah, I'd like
and
to beat
Pitt on the road.
Pitt. Yeah, yes, in Heinz Field or whatever it's called these days. Jeff Collins never had a problem recruiting. So there's good players on that team, but he clearly had a problem coaching. And I think that two-game winning streak for them, I don't think he ever had a two-game winning streak.
No.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm dead serious. Yeah, so as soon as he leaves, they do something they couldn't do under him. So coaching has been a big aspect as far as Georgia Tech goes. And I actually think they'd be 3-1 since he got fired if Jeff Sims hadn't got hurt in the UVA game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, surely they could have scored more than 9 points with Sims at the helm.
You're right.
Man, if y'all didn't see that was a Thursday night game, I think.
Yes.
Man, that thing was ugly. And then UVA goes out. It was 16-9. Then UVA goes out and plays an even uglier game, losing 14-12. And how many overtimes? 4.
I'm so glad that I wasn't watching that game because I think I'd be calling my eyes out.
It was on RSN, so I couldn't
What is that,
get
8 field goals and a 2-point conversion I think the two teams had between the two?
No one got in the end zone until the fourth overtime to score a 2-point conversion.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
How sad is that? So no, pretty much like...
Don't speak too quickly now. The Hokies still have to play this weekend.
Yeah. I'll
Going
check
home to my
myself
glass
as a Virginia
house,
Tech
start
fan.
throwing rocks.
There's seriously been like no coastal chaos this year. It's just, at this point, it's UNC and everybody else because everyone else
right. It's
is not
Atlantic
great.
chaos
Yes.
this year. Like everybody except for Clemson in the Atlantic lost. Well, I just go back and look at my power rankings and like number 2 through number 2, 3, and 4, I think all lost. So you wonder what you're going to do to your power rankings this week. But I think we've pretty much settled in on who's going to win each division.
Yeah,
at this point.
absolutely. So Jeff Collins gets fired. The keys get handed to Brent Key, who was a Georgia Tech alum. He's the current offensive line coach, so he played offensive line there. He gets at least 8 games at the helm, which is a lot. I mean, firing your coach in late September, that's something. But so he's 2-2 so far, a pair of impressive wins to start, and then 2 back-to-back really embarrassing losses, as we talked about, the UVA game and the Florida State game. I think going into those 2 wins, people were thinking maybe he would be the guy, but after the last 2 weeks, I think it's safe to say that he is not going to be their long-term head coach.
Yeah, but they don't know who their athletic director is going to be, right?
They do, actually.
They do?
Jay Batt was hired from Alabama.
Oh, wow.
When did that happen?
It happened a couple weeks ago. His first day on the job was October 24th, so
Okay.
he's been there about a week now.
Well, here's the thing about Key. He's Alabama's former offensive line coach. That's where he was before he came to Georgia Tech.
So he must have gotten fired at Bama. How do you?
I don't know. That's a good question. But if their new athletic director was at Bama for more than a few years, then they would have a pre-existing relationship.
Yeah. Their new AD was also spent some time at Carolina as well. I know my dad said he's met him a couple times and he's a good guy. So I assume that coaching search has started. I mean, that's the big thing that you got to do in your first week as an AD with a head coaching vacancy. I've heard the name Deion Sanders, and I mean, you think Deion Sanders versus Mac Brown in a coaching matchup would be something. Those two personalities, I can't even.
In a recruiting matchup.
Yeah.
But I would like to really like be in somebody's living room for those in-home visits. But yeah, so everybody wants to hire Deion Sanders. Auburn wants to hire Deion Sanders.
Yeah. I think Auburn will get Lane Kiffin, but Deion Sanders will be a name for sure.
Yeah. I kind of think Deion's happy where he's coaching.
don't
He
know.
doesn't need the money.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about the fact that the Georgia Tech athletic director is new to the job, and he's got to hire a football coach without really having had an opportunity to come in and spend time figuring everything out. You need to take probably 6 months, you know, to fully evaluate everything. So I don't know if he was at Carolina, Alabama. I don't know that he really knows a lot about Georgia Tech, but he's got to go hire
He would have to look at the books and get used to the big donors and see what the money situation is like.
like how much can you really count on, you know?
Right. So you're going in blind to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, how do you all feel about firing your coach early season or mid-season and not waiting until December? Do you think it's an advantage to Georgia Tech to kind of get your name out there early, or is it a disadvantage in some ways?
You know, I think it was very unique the year that Fuente was hired at Virginia Tech, because we saw Spurrier announce his retirement and we saw Beamer announce his retirement, I guess just 2 or 3 weeks later.
Yeah.
So you had two athletic directors who had a jump start on everybody else who was going to fire their coaches at the end of the year. Ever since then, we've seen more and more schools fire their coaches during the middle of the season because they're all trying to get a jump on the other. And so I don't think I think it's one of those things that matters if you're one of those first teams to do it. But now that everybody's doing it, or almost everybody, I think it kind of cancels. They all cancel each other out to a certain extent. I think the biggest thing for Georgia Tech is like, if they thought they were going to be in the market for a new athletic director and a new football coach, they should have got the athletic director thing sorted 6 to 8 months ago. So he would be in a better position to, you know, go out and know what he wants to do.
It sounds like an emotional reaction, basically firing the two of them at pretty much the same time, you know, and sometimes people in positions of leadership have those sorts of reactions, you know. You're right. It doesn't sound calculated.
Well, when he hired Jeff Collins, it was kind of interesting. I don't know, Georgia Tech fans were very excited about that hire. I believe he came from Temple, and then each of his 3 or 4 seasons he was there, he only won 3 games. So
bad.
to me, it makes sense to kind of fire the AD. I guess their basketball team did win an ACC championship, but it was during the COVID
luck.
year.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter.
that doesn't matter. I think he was hired specifically for recruiting, is what it seems like.
Jeff Collins?
Yeah, he
Yeah.
had a recruiting reputation, I think, and he proved to be a good recruiter.
And he
there.
did a good job.
Yeah, he did a good job. I mean, Alabama's starting running back originally went to Georgia Tech.
Yep,
That's
Jimmy
pretty
Gibbs.
impressive to be actually. And that guy picked Georgia Tech over a bunch of those big schools originally out of high school. So they've got some good talent on that team. I just think he's one of those guys that it turns out just wasn't a very good coach for whatever reason.
Mean, I have no idea of the ins and outs of it, but you know, to not be able to win more than 3 games in 3 years, you know, you look at Virginia Tech, and you know, we'll get into some of this stuff later. Tech is struggling in a lot of areas. Virginia Tech is right now. They look like a 3-win team, 2, 3, 4. What if you go out and do that again next year, and then you go out in your 3rd year and you start out 1-3? You know, I get it. I get the mindset that they, because this was this Collins' 4th year.
No,
was
this is his 4th year. Would have been.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
He got
so-
4 games into his 4th year
right.
and then was fired.
Yeah,
So it
no, he had
wasn't
a difficult job, because now we all said at the time that when you take over the Paul Johnson offense, you need first you know you don't have a quarterback.
Right.
You know you've got an undersized offensive line that has never been taught the basic fundamentals of how to
been
block
taught
in a
cut
regular
blocking.
offense. They've never been asked to pass block. So it was always going to take 3 or 4 years to rebuild their offensive line, and their offensive line is bad this year.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, the fact that they never showed any progress during his tenure at all. They were just the same team each year. And then the fact that when they finally did fire him, they immediately won their first 2 games.
It's not a good look for him.
It's not a good look for him at all.
And again, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but clearly there was, some guys they really know their X's and O's. Some guys can really recruit. Some guys can really manage a program.
Mm-hmm.
When you get a guy that can do all three, that's a very rare person. Clearly, Jeff Collins, there's something wrong with the machinery there. He did not know how to run the program. I don't know.
He could do one of the three.
Yeah. We know he could recruit fairly well. Doesn't look like he could do either of the others well.
You would have expected them to at least be decent defensively because he's a former defensive coach. And you would think, okay, they'll be fine defensively, but it's going to take a while for their offense to catch up. Their offense never caught up, and they weren't fine defensively. Remember, Tech beat them, 45-0 in 2019, his first year? It was one of those games. Yeah.
The writing was kind of on the wall a little bit here because if you ask me, I would say that they have one of the toughest schedules in the entire country going into this year with having to play, Mississippi and Georgia and UCF, and it didn't start out
He was
well.
not set up for success this year.
Well, before we get into this matchup, I want to go over a couple of the injury notes from the presser yesterday. Dorian Strong is out for a 5th straight game. Malachi Thomas is doubtful. He likely won't play. And then Keyshawn King is probable. With Strong and Thomas missing so much time, Chris, is this the season where you feel like you've talked about redshirting the most? Because as we get to the end of the season, it gets tricky with these injuries, and there only being 4 games left. Do you redshirt a couple of those guys? And even the talk about, are we going to burn someone's redshirt just so that we can have a capable punt returner?
You're a little bit divided. I'm a little bit divided, and I think you take each one of those as an individual example. I think as far as Holloway goes as a punt returner, as a wide receiver, yes, he needs to redshirt, and I want him to redshirt, but you also want to establish the culture of if you earn something, you get rewarded with it. He's earned that job because he's outperformed everybody else who's been in the role. So as far as I'm concerned, he's earned it, so he should play, but yet at the same time, I want him, it would be beneficial for his future for him to redshirt.
Yeah.
So there's a contradiction there. As far as Dorian Strong goes, I would leave that up to him. I think I would prefer it now at this point in what's basically a lost season, so to speak. I would prefer it if he redshirted, just to give himself another eligibility and help Virginia Tech out long term. But he's also been a good football player and a hard worker for Tech, so I would let him make that decision for himself. Malachi Thomas, I think, is going to end up redshirting by default because that was a nasty injury. He got carted off, and he's been in a boot and on crutches this week. So whatever Tech wants to call him doubtful or whatever, he's not playing this week, and I doubt he'll play the rest of the year.
Yeah, back to your comments about Dorian Strong. He's a true junior.
That's right.
So, yeah, be nice to have him for a couple more years, if they can get him to stay around and that sort of thing.
Let's get into this matchup, starting with the Georgia Tech offense. And honestly, we don't really know what it's going to look like. Yesterday around 5 o'clock, we were all ready to say that Zach Pyron was going to be the starter in this game. And then Brent Key had his media availability, and now we hear that Jeff Sims is practicing, and they intend on him being the starter. But really the question is, how healthy is he?
He's such a good runner. He was just starting to play better when he got hurt. I think in the game against Duke where they won, he was 23 of 34 passing, but he also had 17 carries for 95 yards in that game. So he's a dual threat guy, which obviously will concern any Virginia Tech fan who's paid any attention to Tech football throughout the last 10 years or so. But you don't know how healthy he's going to be. I mean, Key says he's a full go. That means he's participating in every part of practice. That doesn't necessarily mean he can go out there and push off his leg and juke and plant and things like that, like he would be if he was 100% healthy.
So let's read the quote. This is with some extra stuff deleted, but it says from Brent Key. Let's try not to say Pride. If Key does get the job, announcers all over the ACC network will be struggling with that.
Yeah.
So he said all of them practiced today. Jeff was out there practicing full go. Every team period, 7-on-7s, good to go. ... Right now we are full board, BOARD, with Jeff being the quarterback. I
mean, you never know. It could be coach speak. It might be he might, or it could be totally the truth and he's 100%, or it could be totally the truth that he's practicing all the time, but he's still somewhat limited.
There's no way he's going to play.
There's no way that there's no way we're going to know for sure until Saturday, most likely, and that makes this a difficult game to call. Because I think there'll be a tougher team for Virginia Tech to beat with a 100% Sims. I feel I know what happened last week, but I still feel better against the true freshman who doesn't have much experience.
Yeah.
You talk about the true freshman. MJ Morris received ACC Rookie of the Week
course he
honors.
did.
And so, if Zach Pyron were to play against us, I would at least hope that he would not get ACC Rookie of the Week against this Virginia Tech defense. I think going back to the Sims injury, though, it was a foot injury, and I feel like that's not something to take lightly, especially given the fact that he is a mobile quarterback. I don't think that you want to necessarily just throw him out there to give you your best chance to win, especially given the fact that Zach Pyron didn't play horribly last week. I mean, he went out in his first college career snaps and played in Tallahassee, and I would say that was, a tough environment to play in until you tweeted a photo yesterday, Will, about the FSU crowd not being so great.
Yeah, that was kind of weird. So for those of you that didn't see me say this on Twitter, I tried to watch, I DVR'd Georgia Tech at Florida State from last weekend and tried to watch it to learn some stuff about Georgia Tech. And I'm not going to throw the announcers under the bus by name, but they weren't telling me anything about Georgia Tech. I wasn't learning anything. Oh, so-and-so's he's their starting linebacker. He's a good player. They needed to fill in more of the backstory. But in the course of watching that, yeah, there were a lot of empty seats there in Doak Campbell. And it was not particularly loud, but you never know if that's a poor job mic in the crowd. So I only made it through about a quarter of the game, and not much happened in the first quarter. So I did not see Florida State taking the big lead, and I didn't see Pyron. Is that his name?
Yeah.
Pyron. I didn't see Pyron. The few minutes I saw him, they just put him in, and he wasn't doing all that great. So
there's so many parallels really with the NC State quarterback situation and this quarterback situation. You lose your starter, and then you bring in a grad transfer from a smaller school, and they don't look great. So you put in the true freshman, and they put on a show. So
yeah, and I said before the NC State game, I said we have a golden opportunity to win 2 straight games.
Yeah.
And I still believe that.
if Leary's out and Sims is out,
Right. And I still believe that was the right viewpoint.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, didn't quite get it done against NC State.
You mentioned in the preview, Zach Pyron played his high school ball with Kenji Christian.
He did. Pinson Valley, I believe, in Alabama.
Yes, Bo Nix also played there.
Oh,
so
wow.
2 great quarterbacks that came out of that high school in Alabama. Speaking of Kenji Christian, is he redshirting?
No, he redshirted last year.
Okay. So
He's just at the bottom.
Not quite
not
there
playing.
yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, moving on from the quarterback, I want to talk about their offensive line first because it's the position that Brent Key coaches. And so you would think, and it's what he played when he was on the team back in the late 90s, so you would think that that's a group that would be successful given the fact that he was given the keys to be their interim head coach. But really, that transition away from the Paul Johnson scheme has come back to hurt them, and they haven't been so great.
Well, they're really young. I mean, I know you've got a lot to say, haven't done the research, but just going from left tackle to right tackle, redshirt freshman, redshirt sophomore, redshirt freshman, sophomore.
Right. So you think about it, your first recruiting class is really your second year is a new coach. So so Brent Pry's first recruiting class is going to be signed this December. Like he signed a few guys, but mostly that was Fuente's class that is true freshmen now. So your oldest players, your oldest offensive lineman that would have been recruited by Jeff Collins would be like a redshirt sophomore.
Yeah, and everybody here is a redshirt sophomore or younger.
Right, exactly. So, it takes, like I said, it takes a while. It can take a while to rebuild an offensive line, especially when it's that traumatic of a scheme change. I mean, I don't think that's just, I don't know how you do that. That's why it was such a horrible idea to hire Paul Johnson in the first place. From a long-term perspective.
They get a couple of ACC championships out of it?
Yeah, and now they might be irrelevant for 10 years.
Wow.
Because that's very tough to dig yourself out of something like that. And I think Collins should have done a better job and needed to go. But I also think that you don't just snap your fingers and make your offensive line better just by hiring the Alabama offensive line coach or the Wisconsin offensive line coach in Virginia Tech's case.
We talked about Jeff Sims being mobile, but he literally has had to be because his offensive line can't protect him at all.
They're a little bit better at run blocking. Their pass blocking is horrible.
Second to worst in the ACC ahead of UVA.
So even it's not good anywhere, but I'll say to me it seems a little bit worse maybe even on the interior. So a guy like Norrell Pollard who's a solid penetration guy from the interior. This could be his type of game.
Yeah, our defensive line should win this battle, I would say, 9 times out of 10, and hopefully they do and show a lot of progression there this week. More to get to with the Georgia Tech offense, but want to throw it over to Carter for the first time.
Scott Glessner came ready to go today.
Oh, man.
So we got this. I love the electronic version now. I saw you did away
There's
with
a button.
Big Brown.
We're getting
copy of
really
it.
advanced now.
Electronic.
No.
version.
So he's talking about the printout. I
The
think.
printout. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But we do
Oh, I'm
need
sorry,
we
yeah.
do need an
need a
electronic
button.
version.
We do.
The printout, yeah. So Scott Glessner says Georgia Tech has only committed 6 turnovers. Their opponents have only scored 6 points total off of those turnovers. Virginia Tech has committed 10 turnovers, and their opponents have scored 45 points off of those turnovers. Vice
Wow.
versa, Georgia Tech has forced 18 turnovers, but has only scored 39 points off of them. And Virginia Tech has only forced 5 turnovers, but have scored 21 points off of them. So that's the
Oh
first
my
thing.
gosh.
Interesting.
So the Virginia Tech's 5 forced turnovers are tied for last in the country.
Yeah.
There's 3 teams at number 129 with just 5 forced turnovers. Now, one thing Virginia Tech does do well is only 10 turnovers. They don't turn it over a ton.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and half of those were in one game.
Yeah, the ODU
So
game.
the ODU game. So in the 7 games since, Tech has 5 turnovers. Yeah, Tech's doing a good job protecting the ball.
By the way, in doing my research, USC, the USC out west, not the one down in Columbia, South Carolina, USC has played 8 games and has 1 turnover. That's incredible.
Lincoln Riley is preaching ball protection, I guess.
It was an interception, and that's just amazing.
Wow.
Georgia Tech has also been outscored by their opponents in each quarter so far this year, minus overtime. Virginia Tech only has the advantage in the first quarter, and they have the advantage there 29-27. Skipping ahead a little bit, Virginia Tech has not lost 5 straight conference opponents, not lost 2 5-straight conference opponents since 1950, and it led into the 1951 season when they lost 14 games in a row.
1950. Who was president then? Eisenhower?
I
thought you meant President of
chairman
Virginia.
material.
I,
Look it
I
up.
wrote this in my recap the other day from the NC State game. It was who was president then? I'll look it up. Give me 1 second.
No, that would have been Truman.
Would have been Truman?
Yes,
Yeah.
it was Truman.
was
That's
Truman.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I should have known.
So,
that.
by the way, when Virginia Tech went 2-8-1 in 1992, the Big East had not started round robin play.
Right.
So that's why it's not included in there.
We're setting all sorts of records this year.
Every week, it's like, when is the last time Virginia Tech did this? 100 years ago.
When's the
Okay,
last-
so 10 false starts. That's the most ever as far as Damian Salas's database goes back to 1987.
1950. Man, that's 72 years ago. Oh my God.
Yeah. I guess we'll start to bookmark the year 2022 as the last time Virginia Tech did this. And hopefully we keep improving every year and we can this year can be put in the past.
So when you're 90 years old and you've got your headset on and you're mentally beaming podcasts to people, you can say things like, Virginia Tech lost 5 conference games this year for the first time since I was in college in 2022.
I'll remember how great my senior year football season was.
Oh,
for a
yeah.
long time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Carter. Let's talk running backs. There's some ACC transfers doing some big things in the Pac-12 and the SEC this year, and Jahmyr Gibbs is one of them, the star running back for the Yellow Jackets who got picked up by Alabama in the transfer portal. Georgia Tech then goes and gets Dylan McDuffie from Buffalo, who looked promising but has not contributed really at all.
Normally, like running backs, you would think would translate more than any other position, because if you got talent, you got talent, right? Over 1,000-yard rusher at Buffalo, and then this year for Georgia Tech, he has 22 carries and is averaging 2.5 yards a carry.
Actually, according to ESPN, it's 22 carries for 45 yards, 2.0 yards.
2.0, okay. Well, either way, not so great.
With a long of 9. So,
Right.
You know,
So-
let's play. Take that out. No, sorry.
And then they got the other transfer running back from Hassan Hall.
From
From
Louisville.
Louisville, Hassan Hall. So he is a guy who was a bit player for Louisville, basically. I think he had 38 carries for them last year. So if you just looked at it before the season, I would have bet that McDuffie would have come in and been their starting running back. But instead, it's been the other way around. He's third string, and Hall's their starter.
So this is the second week in a row I've said something like this. Looking at the NC State roster card last week, Jordan Houston had over 70 carries with no touchdowns. Hassan Hall has 83 carries, no touchdowns. Jeff Sims is second with 87 rushes. Some of those are sacks. 87 rushes. He only has 1 touchdown. So their 2 leading rushers have 170 carries and 1 touchdown.
That happens.
Just an odd stat.
Yeah, it's odd, but it's something like that's more likely to happen when you have a bad offense, which is what Georgia Tech and NC State have. Now, that is something that Virginia Tech has actually been able to do. Tech's leading rusher has 2 touchdowns this year.
Tech's 2 leading rushers have combined for 97 carries, and they have 4 touchdowns between the 2 of them, which is not great. I've been doing roster cards for years and years, and you would hope it's more than that 8 games into the year.
Hassan Hall and Dante Smith are both averaging 5+ yards per carry. Dante Smith also used in the passing game. I wanted to shift over to their receiving core, who doesn't really feature a ton of threats, as noted by their running back being very active in that spot.
Yeah, Nate McCollum's kind of a slot type. He's our leading receiver, 39 catches, but averages just under 10 yards a catch. So he's not a big play threat. And then their second leading receiver is the running back, Hassan Hall, with 19 catches. So they do have a couple of outside receivers. They've got some size out there, but those guys, they just haven't been all that productive. E.J. Jenkins was actually at South Carolina last year with Jason
talk
Brown.
About this parallel with him and Jason
interesting.
Brown. That's insane.
That's crazy.
Read that in your preview.
He was at South Carolina last year with Jason Brown. Before that, he was at St. Francis with Jason Brown. Before that, he played high school football at Chancellor in Fredericksburg with Jason Brown.
That's unreal. Everyone look out for them doing their pictures together on the field after the game, because I'm sure they're close with all the time that they've spent together the last couple of years. That's insane.
And given everything we know about Tech's wide receiver depth now, I wish we had taken E.J. Jenkins.
Yeah.
6'7", 243.
243.
Yeah, and he's not a tight end.
Yeah.
All right, this guy's like bigger than Bucky Hodges. And except they actually call him a wide receiver, which is what Bucky
Does he
was.
run through the catch?
I don't know. But he's 6'7". He's a great blocker, as you would expect from someone that size. So, look for Georgia Tech. I would think at some point during this game, whether it's on a screen pass or whether it's just an outside running play to the running back, you would like to get him out there blocking in front of your ball carrier, because he can certainly do a job on smaller defensive backs.
So he outweighs Mansour Delane, for example, by close to 70 pounds.
And 6 inches.
Yep.
Yeah.
Delane's 6'1", Armani Chapman's 5'11", and he's 6'7", so
yeah.
who's going to be covering him?
I mean, even if he's like isolated on the Sam linebacker, he's still going to outweigh Keonta Jenkins by 30 pounds.
Oh, wow.
And that's the Sam linebacker. I mean, this is just like the biggest, and I'm not like, there's nothing wrong with Delane's size or Jenkins' size. It's just this guy's just a massive wide receiver.
Now, to be fair to Georgia Tech's receiving core, yes, you've got McCollum with 39 and then Hall with 19, but they've got 4 guys who have caught between 11 and 14 balls, tight end and 3 wide receivers. So they do kind of spread it. Once you get beyond McCollum, they have a bunch of guys that have caught passes.
Obviously, they've had inconsistencies. Like they're really a hard team to judge, because obviously they were poorly coached at the beginning of the season. Yeah. Then they had a couple good games, but the last 2 games they haven't had their starting quarterback. So how many catches and how good would they seem if they had had their quarterback the last 2 weeks, and if they had been well coached the first 2 weeks? And of course, the offensive line is in full rebuild mode, so it's maybe not fair to judge them completely. Maybe if their offensive line could protect better and their quarterback could stay healthy, then we have a different view of them.
Yeah, to fill in the blanks on Gibson there, who played against UVA. What did he go, 10 of 25 that night, Chris?
And wasn't it for something like 80 yards? No, it was 95 yards.
Not a lot. And I think he did something like he completed 3 of his first 5, and I thought, this guy looks pretty good. And then he went 7 of, what is that? 20 or something like that after that. Mm-hmm. You wrote in your preview that he got sacked 7 times. And yes, I'm not disputing that Georgia Tech isn't a great pass blocking team. But I watched that game, and he held the ball way too long.
Yeah.
And took some sacks he shouldn't have taken. It shouldn't have been 7.
And we all, of course, remember the last play of that game. And
Georgia Tech fans remember
I don't even know what to say about that decision for him to run out of bounds. I mean, try to win the game.
As the clock expires, throw the ball downfield.
Right.
Yeah.
So another name to look for is Malachi Carter in the receiving core. With our cornerback room banged up, the receivers don't pose a huge concern, but still you'd like to have the depth from Strong and Alves and now Johnson, who apparently all 3 of them are hurt.
Yeah, and apparently not going to play this week as far as Alves and Cam Johnson go. So,
I
here
guess
we go.
Breon Murray
Man,
has to get back into the.
he played 0 snaps against NC State.
Wow. So so for those of you that might have missed it, Delane played every single snap.
Every single snap.
They're going all in on him for good reason.
Yeah, he's the best.
For good reason.
Yeah, he's a good player, and I still like him and Chapman out there. You know, Chapman's been hurt, and that's unfortunate. But you know, Brent Pry said it's the first time in his 32-year coaching career that he's had to play a true freshman 100% of the snaps in a football game, a true freshman corner.
Right.
And he basically, actually, not basically, he flat out said this. He said, the way we figure it, like, you know, he's a true freshman, but and Chapman's been hurt, but whether those guys are 100%, 90%, or 80%, they're our best options. Which is kind of shows how he feels about the rest of Tech's corners with Dorian Strong on the shelf.
Yeah.
I happen to like really. I think if Strong could come back, and at this point I want him to redshirt, of course, but if he can come back, and then I really like that rotation. Like you can play, you can start whatever two you want. I don't really care because they're all capable. I guess you probably start Delane and Strong, but you rotate in Chapman, and Chapman can play either cornerback spot, and you can have a solid 3-man rotation there and keep everybody fresh.
Yeah.
General offensive takeaways for the Yellow Jackets. I mean, their average points per game is below Virginia Tech, so that tells you that our defense might have a decent game.
Yeah, I think that kind of tells you that you probably shouldn't go in the Lane Stadium on Saturday expecting to be highly entertained.
Yeah.
At least not as far as the game goes.
Yeah, all kidding aside, you know, Sims playing in this game is huge for them.
Yeah.
Because of his ability to run the football.
Assuming he can.
Assuming he does.
Assuming he's healthy,
and-
yeah.
Right, yeah.
I think a likely situation is that they maybe start Sims, and then, I mean, I think with the foot injury, it might be a good chance that he gets banged up again and has to come out, and then Zach Pyron probably goes in. But we'll see. I really don't know.
I'm sure that they're really, you know, I don't think there's much of a chance that we're going to see Gibson unless Virginia Tech knocks 2 quarterbacks out of the game. But Pyron, I'm sure they're preparing him and Sims equally. At least that's what I would be doing. So if you're Virginia Tech, you've kind of got to prepare for 2 different types of quarterbacks this week. So Tech might actually have 2 different scout team quarterbacks this week, and that might have been an issue last week. Like, I don't know how they prepared, but you know, they could have had oh my goodness, why am I blank? They could have had Devin Farrell as Jack Chambers, and my gosh,
Jason Brown is
no, you can't be Brown because he's got to take the number 2 reps.
Do we have a true freshman quarterback?
No, we don't have a true freshman quarterback. My gosh, why can't I think of his name? Our redshirt freshman quarterback who's
Taj Bullock.
Taj
Yes.
Bullock.
Yes.
Taj Bullock would have played MJ Collins. Yes.
We'll see.
I don't know that that's how they handled it, but that's
Yeah.
how it would have made sense. But I don't know if there's a and to me though that's ideal. That's a fairly like for like comparison in terms of physical ability. But I don't know if there's like a like for like comparison on Tech's roster this week in terms of preparing for Georgia Tech's quarterbacks.
So many quarterback issues this season, and in 2 weeks we'll get to talk about Charlie Brewer, who I think is coming back from injury before the start of the
Just
Tech
in
game.
time.
Does he play for Liberty?
He does.
Yes,
Yeah.
but he was their starter at the beginning but got hurt.
Yeah.
And they've
Forgot
still
about that.
They've
And
still
he was
won.
out like 6 to 8 weeks,
Yeah.
but I believe he'll be back for the Virginia Tech game, of course.
Good timing. Is he on his 3rd team? Does that sound right?
Baylor,
Utah,
Utah.
Liberty.
How many
Yes.
concussions has he had? Like he is like the
during the break. Look it up.
yeah he's like one of the most concussed players in college football history. I think.
Yeah.
Jeez.
He probably shouldn't still be playing, but
Well, that's going to wrap up the first half, but before we break, let's check back in with Carter in the 4th chair.
Well, I just want to say it's so sad to see what has happened to the Battle of the Techs, because from 2005 to 2012, whoever won that game pretty much was going to represent the Coastal in the ACC championship game. In fact, 2012 was the only year it didn't, when Virginia Tech won that Labor Day night game here in Lane Stadium, and Georgia Tech went to the ACC championship game. I think they were 6-6 that year. But because of North Carolina and their whole deal, Georgia Tech actually went to the ACC championship game in Charlotte. So that's certainly something I wanted to know. The other thing I wanted to bring up is I saw on Twitter yesterday, it was the 15-year anniversary of the Jersey Gate game.
Yes, I
down
was
in
going to talk
Atlanta,
about that.
where Sean Glennon, Tyrod Taylor, and Cam Chancellor all had their jerseys stolen out of the Virginia Tech locker room.
Dude, that would have been a trivia question. Everybody knows about Glennon. Who were the other 2?
I knew
Tyrod
Tyrod.
Chancellor
Yeah.
and someone else.
I saw it on Twitter, so I knew who it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, those were the three big ones. I don't know if there was any more, but those were the three big ones. So that's certainly something. I don't know if you follow the Twitter account No Context College Football.
Yes,
Would
it's
definitely
amazing.
recommend following that Twitter account.
Also,
by the
No
way.
Context College Basketball is a good one too.
And they would have a field day with that if that happened in the modern day.
Yeah.
Regarding your first point, the two Techs. So in 1999, Virginia Tech went unbeaten and played for a national championship. And 9 years before that, Georgia Tech won the national championship. Like they split it with Colorado, right?
Yeah.
In 1990. So these are two teams that in our lifetime have either won or played for national championships.
Yeah.
And now they're at the bottom.
I do miss the days of having some variety. So for you youngins, and you were actually born when this happened, Kate.
What year is this?
2007.
The greatest year in
Okay.
college football
Study
history.
the 2007 college football
Yeah,
season. It
I
is
can't say I was a
amazing.
big football fan when I was 6. It transitioned a little bit later, but
That was the year where being ranked first or second meant you were losing the next week.
At one point, it was like number 1 Missouri versus number 2 Kansas or something like
my
that.
God.
And obviously, South Florida was up there for a while.
the way, they're
it
really
was
struggling this
incredible.
year.
It was an incredible season.
Yeah,
well,
it's-
this year even there's a ton of really good teams. I mean, the playoff rankings obviously came out last night, and there's a couple unbeaten teams who aren't even projected to make the playoff at this point.
Right.
So
Also in 2007, Boston College was number 2. When up until very close to the end of the season, remember they were number 2 when they beat Tech in
they
that
beat
ranked
Tech,
game.
that's right.
And then Virginia Tech ended up number 3 in the BCS rankings after winning the ACC championship and beating Boston College. So there was just a lot of parity in college football in terms of the national championship race that year. We'll probably never.
and it was fun.
It was fun. And I'm thankful for Tennessee this year. And I don't want to talk
Yes.
about Hendon Hooker, Jalen Hyatt, or anything
least it's
like that.
something different,
It's
right?
something. Thank God it's just
yeah,
not
I totally
Alabama
agree.
versus Georgia. Now it still might end up being Alabama versus Georgia for all we know. But at least it's November and we have something else to talk about.
Are Tennessee and Georgia playing this weekend?
This weekend.
yes,
Yeah.
3:30
In
on
Georgia.
CBS.
Yep.
Man,
I can't wait.
got
it's
to find a
two-
tailgate with a television.
Right. It's a 1 versus 1 game because one team is ranked first in the AP poll and one is ranked first in the college football playoff poll.
Wow.
So it's a preview national championship game. Yeah, I would go back to the Jersey Gate. I feel like that game will go down as one of the most interesting college football games, and it had nothing to do with what happened on the field.
Yeah, they had to write their names on the back of the jerseys with Sharpie,
Yeah. Bizarre.
recreate the Nike swoosh.
And they drew Nike swooshes on them because Georgia Tech was, I believe, a Russell Athletics team.
Tech
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Virginia Tech swears that's not an inside job. I've always had my doubts.
So that year, people got into the Tech locker room. This year, people got into the Tech locker
Hey,
room
that's
before the
true.
ODU game.
Yeah.
Something interesting to note.
Nice callback. Very
That's
well done.
right.
All right, that's going to lead us into our break here on episode 268 of the Tech Sideline podcast presented by First Bank and Trust. Talked a lot about this Georgia Tech offense in the first half and what it is with and without Jeff Sims. And on the other side, we'll take a look at their defense and get to game picks. Make sure you stay with us. We'll be right back. We welcome you back into episode 268 of the Tech Sideline podcast presented by First Bank and Trust. As a reminder, if you are watching on YouTube, continue to drop any questions you have for Will and Chris in the chat, and we'll get to those with Carter at the end of the show. As hard as it may be to believe, this is one of the better defenses that the Hokies have faced this year. Not quite as good as Pitt and NC State, but they could pose some issues for our offense this week, especially given the fact that we need to build off of that third quarter success that we had at NC State.
Yeah, they give up a lot of yards, but they make a lot of tackles for loss, and they're always in a bad position. Like, I think they've had to run, I forget exactly how many plays this year, but they've been on the field like more than like all but 6 other FBS defenses, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're on the field a lot. They've been fairly efficient, though. Obviously, again, they weren't particularly well coached earlier in the year, but it was their defensive performance that allowed them to beat Pitt. It was their defensive performance that allowed them to beat Duke. It was their defensive performance that gave them a chance to beat UVA, even with the quarterback knocked out. They didn't play well against Florida State last week. Don't get me wrong, this defense can be had.
Hey, they played well early when I watched.
Right. But again, they're just on the field a whole lot. They probably won't be on the field as much this week, so they should play better against the Hokies. But and I look at Florida State lit them up, but Florida State's also like top 20 in FEI offense. Florida State's a very efficient offense.
I think their record is deceiving. They're better than what their record shows.
Yeah. Florida State, they've lost some close games, and they've been right there in all their games. So I think you kind of throw out last week's result to a certain extent, and consider that Virginia Tech's offense is about 100 spots below Florida State's,
Right.
and I don't think the Hokies are likely to put up 41 points and 600 yards like the Noles did.
No.
And the strength of their defense is the linebackers, would you say?
I don't know. I don't think I wouldn't say they have like a huge strength or like a huge weakness either. They just seem kind of solid across the board to me.
Yeah.
Keon White's a really good defensive end. I think their middle linebacker. I don't know if you pronounce it. Ale.
Ayende Ile.
Yeah, I think the Ile.
I mean, he has some crazy stats. Leads the team in tackles and tackles for loss, second in sacks, and he's forcing fumbles and recovering fumbles.
Yeah,
so he's all over the field.
Over the place. And he had a bad year last year, but he's having a good year this year. Quality.
Let's not skip over. You did mention Keon White, 6'5", 286.
Yeah.
Defensive end.
Product of Old Dominion and Norfolk, Virginia.
He was a 0-star recruit coming out of North Carolina. Only got offered by Old Dominion, Virginia State, and Hampton, and some small schools like that. Signed with ODU. So I don't know if there was an academic issue or he just wasn't scouted well. But played there for 1 year in 2019 and had a great freshman season, and then figured out very quickly that he was too good to play football at ODU. So he transferred up to Georgia Tech, and it is translated to the ACC level. Yeah. He's a very good player. He had a good game against Tech in 2019 when he was a freshman.
Yeah, I looked it up. He was second on their team that day. Tech beat him pretty handily. But he had 8 tackles, including 2 tackles for loss, and I think he recovered a fumble. So, yeah.
You said last week, Chris, we play our best games offensively against the best defenses like Pitt. And last week we were on par to do that against NC State until the fourth quarter meltdown. And, of course, the loss of Thomas doesn't help that.
Yeah, we talked about on the Monday podcast, if you take that third quarter and make it a whole football game, 4 quarters, that's over 1,000 yards of total offense in one game. Yeah. But then again, if you do that for the fourth quarter, then it's minus 16 yards of offense for an entire game. So you can't play that. But this Tech team, it's times they show flashes. But every team shows flashes at some point. If you didn't show any flashes, you'd never score, right?
Right.
Like you would get shut out every game. The bottom line is this team hasn't scored in 6 of the last 8 quarters they've played.
And running the football is it's going to be an issue. We don't expect Thomas to play.
And King not at 100%.
Yeah, and even if he is 100%, he might, his size and as often as he gets knocked out of games, like he might be out of the game in the second quarter.
And I phrased it that way in our preview. I said something like, if he does play, how long is he going to last? And then you go beyond that to Chance Black, I think averages 2.7 a carry. Bryce Duke, 2.5 a carry.
Jalen Holston is
So tell me right now, our best healthy option to run the football is Grant Wells.
and he weighs 208 pounds.
Right, and he's the only person besides that's going to play in this football game besides Keshawn King that has shown any ability to beat a man in the open field this year.
So here's an interesting little nugget in terms of, when you look at rushing totals, they say number of carries, yards gained, and yards lost. Grant Wells leads the Hokies in yards gained. Mm-hmm. He's gained 276 yards rushing. Keshawn King is second with 264. Now Wells has lost a bunch from sacks and things like that.
If college kept their stats like the NFL, Grant Wells would be our leading rusher.
Virginia Tech's leading rusher. And it's not like they feature him in the running game.
Right.
They don't run a lot of read option or anything like that.
Yeah, but he made some big time plays for Tech against NC State. I mean, the one touchdown run, he juked 2 linebackers out and then ran outside and scored. And you don't see Tech's running backs with the exception of Malachi Thomas, that when they get in the open field against a linebacker,
that was a nice cut. I know the one you're
they
talking
can't
about.
make guys miss. Yeah. But Grant Wells can. So yes, he's our best healthy option running back right now, which you prefer it not to be, but it is what it is. And Tech's lack of options at running back is going to probably change the way Georgia Tech lines their defense.
Yep.
It certainly did with NC State once Malachi Thomas got knocked out. So
these discussions we're having don't make me feel better.
No.
And we'll get into that when we talk about the predictions.
Right. So we expect it to be a pass-heavy game. Doesn't help that Georgia Tech has 2 pretty solid corners in Zamari Walton and Miles Sims, both pretty long guys too.
6'3",
both of them.
Yeah, and so that'll be an interesting matchup. Caleb Smith is a pretty physical receiver, and he got his long touchdown last week because he got off the coverage by using his hands, not necessarily by pushing off, but just getting into a hands battle with the other receiver, and he won that battle. And it helps get the defensive back off balance, and it's a legal thing to do.
It was a masterful, very slight push off there at the end. He did a great job in that reception.
Yeah. It was very extremely well done by his part. Now these are going to be bigger corners, so. Can you apply the same physical style of play against these bigger corners? And
well, Walton they're both 6'3". Walton's 185 and Sims is 187.
Right, so they're not like big dudes, but they have plenty of length. Yeah. Now they're a lot bigger than the other wide receivers Tech will put on the field.
Correct. Yeah, Lofton is 5'11", 193, and Blue is 6'0", 192. So Caleb Smith, I was watching him make that catch and score, and he's put a lot of work into his career.
Yeah.
And it's really it's finally coming to a head for him. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He looked like a man on that play.
And what a shame that it's this year for him. I mean, I'm glad it's better now than never for him, but he's a guy that deserves more success than the team is having. So hopefully he can get a win this week.
Now, I didn't talk to him during ACC football kickoff and haven't seen him since then. What did he say? Did he consider transferring at the end of last year?
No, he was apparently Jafar Williams told him that he should.
Yeah.
But he didn't.
And I think a lot of people took that the wrong way. Maybe Jafar Williams that was further back in his career, though.
I don't know that was further back in his career.
You think it was the end of last year?
I don't remember.
Wow.
That'd be a better question for David because he was standing there when he said it. Yeah.
We've talked about a couple players, but the name I've heard the most through research is safety Lamiles Brooks. He's the highest grading safety in the ACC this year and a product of Trinity Christian with some other Hokies we know of.
Yes. Shamari Connor, Isaiah Ford, all went to Trinity Christian.
Jacksonville, yep.
Tech fans might remember Lamiles Brooks as Miles Brooks because he was recruited heavily by Virginia Tech, and this would have been when you were on the recruiting staff. Mm-hmm. And he came down to Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech. And for a while, I really thought Virginia Tech was going to get him. Gosh, I wonder how many times I've actually accidentally said just Tech on this podcast.
Yes.
A fair amount, but it's I'm actually sensitive to that, but it's pretty clear which one we're talking about. Okay,
good. But anyway, Brooks is the highest grading safety in the ACC this year in his first year as a starter.
Yeah.
So very, very good player, kind of the player.
So just a sophomore.
Trinity Christian's one of those schools that you want to recruit where it's kind of like Highland Springs or it's kind of like DeMatha or Bishop McDevitt up in Pennsylvania where I hope Tech signs a couple players of this year. It's just a high rate of success for recruits from that school.
School in Maryland that Tech's gotten one or two guys from. Didn't Cam Johnson come from
Some private school at the Baltimore.
No, Cam Johnson came from it's a small private school in Baltimore. It's relatively new. It's where all the best. They had like 10 of the top 20 players in Maryland last year. Bishop.
St. Francis Academy.
St. Francis Academy. Thank you. That's it. And DeMatha is a big one too. Like Tech has a commit from DeMatha this year. They've got a commit from Bishop McDevitt. They've got a commit from Highland Springs. So I think it's very good that they're recruiting those specific schools.
One stat to watch defensively for both squads really is tackles for loss, which we mentioned earlier. Hokies ranked 25th statistically in tackles for loss, and Georgia Tech is 26th. So just one off from each other.
6.5 a game. Is that right?
Yeah, it's thereabouts. And both offensive lines aren't particularly good.
Yes.
And now they'll both be playing defenses that make a lot of tackles for loss. So you got to even think like the Virginia Tech defense, even when they've played bad, like their run defense against Pitt was like as bad as it gets, but yet at the same time, like a third of those plays were tackles for loss.
I think they had 8 TFLs against Abanikanda.
Right.
I think if I remember looking
Which
at it.
makes it even more insane that he ran for 320 yards. But it's like Tech the pre-Tisdale returning, Tech was either making a huge tackle for loss or giving up big plays. And fortunately, I feel like they've been, well, I know they've certainly been less susceptible to big plays now that Tisdale's back. He's brought some stability. But yeah, this on paper, it looks like this could be a game considering the quality of both offensive lines and the fact that both defenses make a lot of tackles for loss. We could see a lot of long yardage situations this week, and that's probably why, again, another reason why both offenses have struggled. I'm guessing they've both been in plenty of long yardage situations this season.
So overall, it's a pretty good defense. Jeff Collins set them up with some dynamic players, and they've looked good in spots. But if I'm Virginia Tech, I'm watching that FSU tape religiously where they just kind of imploded. Special teams-wise, Georgia Tech has had 4 punts blocked this year. We did it once on the road at Pitt.
That's incredible because that kind of stuff just doesn't happen these days.
That would be huge if we could get another blocked punt in this game.
2 did come against Clemson in the first game of the season, so only 2 since then. But yeah, they're just not... They're pretty good in the return game. They've had some nice returns, but as far as kicking, they've had their struggles.
Well, their field goal kicker, I think, has made 9 in a row.
He's their new field goal kicker.
Right.
Their original one got benched for being bad. Yeah.
He missed an extra point against UVA.
Okay.
But field goals have all been good,
Okay.
Is that why Gibson ran out of bounds at the end because the guy had missed an extra point?
I will never be able to explain that. So.
And Chris, didn't you do the research and they've got a punt returner who averages 12 yards a return? Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, but it's like a small sample size.
Like 6 or 7 or 8 or something like that.
And the same thing for kickoff return. The guy it was a good average, but only like 6 returns. Yeah. So I don't know if they're like fair catching a bunch or what.
Which I would recommend.
Yeah, no.
Please fair catch the kickoff.
No, their punt team itself has not been good this year, whether it's giving up blocks or whether it's in coverage. So Virginia Tech has not been able to block punt returns this year. So hopefully this is a week their punt return team, whether it's returning or whether it's getting pressure on the punter, hopefully this is a week where you can finally do something there. I don't want to burn Holloway's red shirt just a fair catch. Yeah. Like I would actually like to get a few blocks and give him an actual opportunity to return.
Didn't Pry himself say that Tech is not doing a good job of blocking the Gunners?
Yes.
Yeah. So stepping back and looking at this game and beyond, we got out of that tough 5-game stretch. And if you're looking at the schedule at the beginning of the year, Georgia Tech game and the 3 games after it are the quote-unquote easy part of the schedule, or so we thought. Now it looks a little more daunting. I think a lot of people have nixed us out of the thought of making a bowl game this year, but if they were to make a bowl game, they would have to go on a 4-game win streak starting this week. The chances of that are unlikely, but...
Yes, they
if Tech was healthier, maybe. Yeah. Virginia Tech.
Oh, come on now.
If Malachi Thomas was healthy.
Do you still think they'd win 4 games in a row?
Oh, I'm not saying I think they would. I would like their chances better.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I would
and
like
Dorian Strong.
I would like their chances better, but I still wouldn't like them.
It would be huge, though, to win this game and a couple of the games after this to build momentum going into the offseason. I think like you said in the preview, if you go 2-10, it's like, how do you keep recruits? How do you build momentum going into the next year? We need a win or two in these next 4 weeks.
We do, and I think Virginia Tech's players have done a great job buying in. They've bought into a new coaching staff, different things they're being asked to do. Their work ethic is very strong. They believe that if they do what they're asked, they'll win. But they're human beings also, and there's only so much a human being, they hear something and then it just never happens. They're like, you know what, this maybe is not the right path. So you don't want to go 2-10 because you'd be afraid you will lose some of that buy-in, because some players would be like, we just went 2-10 and that was the worst year in Tech, almost in Tech football history. Certainly the worst year of their lives as far as Virginia Tech football goes. So you want them to feel some hope so they continue to be bought in. So that's why I do think it's important for Virginia Tech to win a couple of games this month. I'm not holding out hope of beating Duke or Liberty, but I am holding out hope of beating Georgia Tech and Virginia. And gosh, if I never would have guessed when I was growing up that I would have said that. You would be the other way around, right?
Carter, do we know when the last time Virginia Tech lost 10 games in a season was? I mean,
I'll look it up real fast.
Is it
What
like
was the
1952?
1992 record that year?
2-8-1.
2-8-1, yeah.
Well, first of all, for many years they only played 11 games, so you'd have to go 1-10.
Yeah,
to lose 10 in a
it
year.
would have to be one of those 1950 something
Late
teams,
40s, early 50s
when they had
teams.
de-emphasized football.
Gotta be.
I would think so.
Ugh, that is not a mark you want to hit.
No. So like not even any of those 1970s teams where like Don Strock threw twice as many interceptions as touchdowns. Not even they.
They at least won like 4 games.
Right. Yeah.
4 and 7.
1950, they were 0-10 that year.
0-10.
Oh my god.
0-10 in the Southern Conference.
So 72 years ago.
Yep.
I was just getting ready to throw it over back to you, so that's good timing if you have one more point.
I just was going to say, I like the new 3-5-5 format, but I am going to miss the trips down to Atlanta. I think going down to Georgia Tech is, maybe you disagree, but Bobby Dodd Stadium is a cool place to see a game. The fan bases, when they're good, enjoy the football down there. Waffle House is great down there. I will say that.
I've actually never been to a game at Georgia Tech. Now, I went to the World Series last year.
Oh, that's right.
While Virginia Tech was playing in Atlanta. And I went down there, and my original intent was to like go to the World Series Friday night, go to the Tech game at noon, and then go to another World Series game that night. And then the Braves won on Friday night, and I'm like, you know what? If Virginia Tech loses this game, it's going to ruin my day in the middle of my World Series trip. So I didn't go. So I decided to watch it on TV in my hotel, and then, of course, I turned my television on and quickly realized that RSN was blocked out in Atlanta.
Yep.
So I couldn't actually watch that game.
The Astros actually stayed in Tech's hotel on that trip.
Was that right?
Yep. Damian Salas told me that.
I'm not going to miss trips down to Georgia Tech. The only thing I will miss is going to the varsity before.
I've
and
never
after
been.
Games. It's
Is it
really
good?
good.
We went after the game last year. Really, really good experience.
Yeah.
Giovanni Heater disagreed.
Really?
He was with us. He did not like it.
Really?
So
Everyone
little
always
bit
has
different.
opinions about, the varsity and in and out and Five Guys and where you rank all of those burger places, but I feel like you can't really go wrong. Well, I hope for a lot of reasons that Tech wins this game, but there'll be some Virginia Tech football royalty on the sidelines, which would make a win even more sweet. Cam Chancellor will be there. Bruce Arians will be there, to name a few. But getting into game picks, Virginia Tech back at home coming off of a heartbreaker on the road. They're favored by 3.5. Did the Jeff Sims news play a factor into you all's picks this week?
For me, yeah. I wrote the preview, and I'd submitted it for David and Will to do their picks, and I'd sent it to you to prepare. And then the news came out that Sims was practicing, so I had to go back and rewrite part of it.
Yeah, it was late in the day.
And then after doing a little more research on that and more thinking, I actually switched my pick from Virginia Tech to Georgia Tech.
Same score, just flipped
Same
the
score,
winner.
just flipped it. You're kind of picking scores out of thin air at this point, but you can't imagine at this point picking both teams to score over low 20s for any game, right?
And that's where we all landed. You came in at Georgia Tech 20, Virginia Tech 17. For me, as the week started, I felt good about it because I'd seen Gibson play, hadn't seen the freshman play, and still haven't. Didn't think Sims was going to play. And then what got me discouraged was I was just looking at stats, and I was trying to figure out how Virginia Tech can win this game. And I was having trouble finding an area where they have a strength. So I went to the NCAA stats website, not cfbstats.com, but the NCAA. And there's a certain, when you drill down into their stats, there's a place where you can land that if you click on the team name, you get in table format a profile of 24 national team stats. 24. Virginia Tech is outside the top 113 of those 24 stats. Over half of them outside the top 100 out of 131 teams. So then you start wondering, they're top 50 in a few things? They're only top 40 in 2 stats. Rush defense, I think, is one of them where they rank 38th in the country. And third down defense, they rank 38th or 39th. And then they rank 117th in fourth down conversion percentage. So it kind of erases what you're doing on third down. So I just got really discouraged. And I was like, after reading Chris's preview, and I can see pathways for Georgia Tech to win, I just can't see them for Virginia Tech.
I mean, I can see them, but
they got to win the turnover margin.
Yeah, and
sure.
I said earlier in the podcast, Virginia Tech's only forced 5 turnovers all year, last in the country.
Yeah. So I can see pass for Virginia Tech to win, but the simple fact is they're 2-6 for a reason. And sometimes you have a bad record, and then you look at your stats and you say, look, there's no way this is a 2-6 football team. But when you look at our stats, yeah, we're a bad football team. Like, it's not dumb bad luck that we're 2-6.
And they're just a couple of plays away from being 4-4.
I know, right. So they could be better, but generally speaking, you lose because you're not good enough.
Yeah.
Right? So like Virginia Tech lost to Miami because Virginia Tech couldn't beat a Miami team that was basically missing 4 offensive starters for most of that game. And the only reason Tech scored is probably because of critical Miami penalties. And they only showed up to play for offensively. It took them over a whole half to adjust to what NC State was doing offensively or defensively. Excuse me. So it's just not a good football team. Now I'm not saying Georgia Tech is good,
right?
But I thought a comment from Brent Pry was interesting. They won their first 2 games after Jeff Collins was fired and Key became their interim head coach. And Brent Pry said, well, they started winning games because they quit making mistakes.
Right.
So they're not making as many mistakes as they were earlier in the year. Meanwhile, Virginia Tech is still making the same mistakes they were earlier in the year. Or different mistakes, or more mistakes, however you want to look at it. So when I look at the trajectories, I mean, Georgia Tech's won 2 football games since the last time Virginia Tech won. Right. And their mistakes have gone down while Virginia Tech's, at best, has stayed the same. So I just picked Georgia Tech barely based on that and the fact that Sims was able to practice and sounds like he's going to play.
Yeah, and Virginia Tech has done some things well at times. Like they've had games where they've only had 3 or 4 penalties. They've had games where they haven't fumbled at all, haven't turned it over. They've had games where they haven't had 10 false starts. Can we do several or all of these things all at once if they catch the kickoff and don't fumble it? If Peter Moore starts punting for 45 to 50 yards instead of 35 to 43, if we can just piece some of these things together, sure, you can see it. But it's getting discouraging, and I don't want to get down on them. I don't want to dump on them. But it gets discouraging when they do find new ways to lose each week. Mm-hmm. I keep thinking eventually they're going to win one. Wouldn't surprise me at all if they went out and won this one because Georgia Tech isn't a great team. But I admit that I always go back to if they played this thing 10 times, who would win the majority of them? Mm-hmm. And I feel like that would be Georgia Tech. I might feel different Saturday.
I think they might split.
Yeah.
But so I don't know. It's a coin flip is what I wrote. And
right. You and David both wrote that independently. You used the phrase coin flip.
Okay. So the thing about Virginia Tech to me is like they're not really trending up in anything. Like maybe they're getting a little better offensively, but now once Malachi Thomas came back, but now guess what? Malachi Thomas is gone again. So we're kind of back to square one.
So you were Georgia Tech 20-17. I was Georgia Tech 24-17, and David was Georgia Tech 23, Virginia Tech 21. So
David thinks it's going to be a shootout.
The fans, interesting. This is the first time this has happened in a while. We're up to 430 votes, and Hokies win by 1 to 10 is 40% of the voting.
Yep.
Jackets win by 1 to 10 is 28%. Jackets win by 11 plus.
Yep.
Yeah, so 55% of voters so far are picking Virginia Tech to win.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me too much, but still, considering Virginia Tech is playing a 3-5 football team, like, I don't think there's any scenario in the past that I can think of where only 55% of Virginia Tech fans would pick the Hokies to beat a 3-5 team.
Yeah.
So that actually, when you think about it like that, that number's very low, right?
If Virginia Tech is going to put all the pieces together in one game, you would think it would come in one of the next 4 games, given the opponents. Duke is probably the best opponent, and maybe not that game, but we'll
if I
see.
could pick one, it would be, well, clearly UVA, but
Yeah.
I really want Tech to play well at Liberty.
Please.
I know Whit Babcock really wants Tech to play well at Liberty.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't take having that conversation again.
No.
And just, can you imagine if Virginia Tech lost to Old Dominion and Liberty in the same
On
season?
the road in the same
Can you imagine if Virginia Tech lost to Old Dominion and Liberty and Virginia in the same season? Because it might happen.
I
It
just
could
can't
happen.
see us losing to UVA. Obviously, that'll be a story
I
in
know,
3 weeks. But
I know, and it's funny. Like, I remember the 2018 game when there's a UVA fan sitting next to me, and he was like, "Congrats on the win in advance. You're going to beat us." And I'm like, "No, you're going to beat us. We're not very good." It was the weirdest thing. I'm sitting here telling him why UVA is going to win. He's telling me why Tech's going to win. Like, neither of us had any confidence in our own team.
Yeah.
So I'm sure like UVA fans are not very confident in the game. But anyway, that's a few weeks down the line.
That's for the future. Yes, they have looked pretty bad.
Yeah.
the next couple previews will be a fun one. I don't know, like if Liberty beat us, would they like storm the field? I feel like it's an embarrassment.
Absolutely.
Yes.
They will do
They
it.
should.
When does that going to stop? Like ODU stormed the field.
Yeah.
Like, really? You did it just 4 years ago.
Yeah, it's not that big of a shock.
I feel like it's embarrassing for them if they storm the field because we are 2-6.
They did it for when they beat BYU, right?
Yes.
I don't
A
know.
few years- yeah.
I was watching the end of that game, but
they
I
did.
turned it off.
Yeah,
at that point.
I think they did, and they'll do it. Of course they will.
Yep, they will.
I mean, they shouldn't, because they're better. You should never storm the field when you beat someone you're better than.
Yeah. When you're 7-1 and you beat a 2-6 team if they played today. You know. Anyway,
Well, we'll see how they play against Arkansas this week, and we'll see how we play against Georgia Tech.
that game is at Arkansas, right? Liberty didn't somehow magically get Arkansas to come to Lynchburg
No, it is in Fayetteville.
because
Before-
SEC don't play around.
Yes, absolutely. Before we go, Carter, is there any questions from the chat?
Not much today, just 2. Jason Link wants to know, what are the chances the offense uses Grant Wells more as a runner this week, with King and Thomas probably being sidelined? Chris has said that he sees Blackmore as a wide receiver and Duke's a freshman.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you've got to try to find a way to do that to a certain extent without overworking him and getting him knocked out. I think you can pick your spots, and I texted somebody during the NC State game, and it was on that 3rd and 1 where Virginia Tech got stopped like they always do when they run the ball right up the middle on 3rd and 1. And I texted somebody, can we not like do something else, like run a speed option or something like that? And just because he's a good athlete.
Yeah.
Wells is a good athlete. And then sure enough, later in the game, NC State ran a speed option on 3rd and 1 to pick up the first down, because when you're bunched inside like that, if you can get it to the outside quickly, I think Wells, could potentially make a difference in things like that. So I think you have to pick your spots, and I think they have picked their spots recently. I mean, they've been running him in design runs to score touchdowns.
Yeah.
But you don't want to use it. You got to be careful. Like, you don't want to use him as the Logan Thomas battering ram, though.
Got one more, Scott Glessner. And this is actually a good question. How much of the false starts affect play later in the game? Example, the O-line / wide receivers getting off the line to block or evade defenders.
It could. It could. I think that stuff kind of gets in your head, and it can affect all sorts of your game. Now, what's interesting about the false start thing is I didn't have any idea watching the game like exactly what the issue was, but my speculation was that maybe Tech's cadences are a little too complicated, and they can't tell the difference between their own, like their own quarterback's yelling out stuff, and the defense is also yelling out stuff, and that's basically what Pry said was the NC State defense. They were barking out signals within the rules because they weren't copying Tech's cadence like word for word, but they were yelling their own stunt calls and stem calls and things like that, and it was throwing the Tech offensive lineman off, that's nothing new. Tech has done that before. That's perfectly legal and fine. But then Pry said,
so let me since we're talking about it, let me read it exactly.
Okay.
It's 2 paragraphs, and he is, when he says his first part, he's adjusting he's talking about the punishments that they get for committing penalties. He said, I don't think the penalty system is broken. The Wolfpack were doing a nice job with a move call that was catching our guys off guard. They were all related to move calls by the opponent. A lot of dramatic action by those defensive ends when they moved, which, as long as they're not using our cadence, it's within the rules. It's something we had to look at, what we're doing with our cadence and making sure that we're not making it too difficult for our guys. In the end, they have to sit there, and the reflex was to hold off. They can't react to sudden movements and noises. It was intentional to draw guys off sides.
right, but that's normal. That's part of the game.
Yes.
These days. I mean, Tech has done that. Like, you remember how Tech used to shift their defensive line right before the snap in the mid-90s? Part of that was maybe with cadence some, and part of it was to throw off man blocking schemes. But it was a little bit of both.
Drive blocking.
Yeah, exactly. I wrote in my post-game NC State column, I said, I don't know what's up with the false starts, but I worry that Tech's cadences might be too complicated. Brent Pry just said the same thing, basically,
with more words.
Right. So, if you want to, if you're falling for the stuff that the defense is doing in terms of what they're verbalizing, that means you need to simplify what you're doing, and so to go on the most simplest thing, rather than listening to something that's very, very complicated. So that could be an issue. That could have been the issue for them this past week.
That's all we got today.
Awesome.
But that's one of the things that bothers me. It's like, I want to pick Virginia Tech to win this game, and I did originally, but like, they might have lost to NC State because of cadences. That's a brand new way to lose a football game that I'd never thought about before. So, like, just looking at this game on paper, I kind of think Virginia Tech's going to win, but I also kind of think it's like, what's it going to be different? What's it going to be this week?
Nah.
Is it going to be 15 penalties? Is it going to be 5 turnovers? Is it going to be clock management? Is it going to be cadences? Or is it going to be something brand new that we've never even heard of before? So that they keep finding new ways to lose, and until they break themselves of that habit, it's really hard to pick them to win.
It is early November, and that's where we are.
Well, thank you, Carter. Game previews posted on techsideline.com as of today. Make sure you check that out and vote in the score poll. It's our last week without basketball. Next time we're doing a podcast, it'll be game day for both men's and women's basketball. So basketball content hitting the feed soon, I'm sure. That'll be exciting. Keep checking out TSL Today, hosted by Giovanni Heater. Another great episode of the Tech Sideline podcast. Want to thank everybody on set today. Will Stewart, founder and general manager for Tech Sideline. He's at Will Stewart TSL on Twitter. Chris Coleman, lead analyst and columnist for Tech Sideline. He's at Chris Coleman TSL on Twitter. Carter Hill in the fourth chair did a great job. He's at CBHill_3. Enjoyed his contributions, and Nick Brown producing. Thank you, Nick. The Hokies take the field for Game 9 against Georgia Tech at 12:30 p.m. inside Lane Stadium on Saturday. It'll be televised by RSN, and we'll be back Monday to break it all down. Enjoy your weekend, Hokies fans, and enjoy the game.